Well, hi, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here, pleasure to see the sunshine. I'm normally based in Glasgow. It's 6 degrees colder there today, apparently. So I'm going to share with you some analysis we've been doing over the last, probably over the last 4 or 5 months or so, effectively trying to sort of figure out, well, what do the future economics of our sector look like? And what does the business case look like from a UK government perspective? Hopefully many of you are aware of the Catapult, the offshore renewable energy Catapult. We've been in existence for almost 5 years now. We are the UK government, the UK government's Technology Innovation Centre for offshore wind, wave energy and tidal energy. The map there shows you where we've got, where we're based. We're headquartered in Glasgow, but we've got a large operational facility in Blythe, just outside of Newcastle. And also we've got a number of satellite offices, including one here in Wales with Paul Elsmore, who leads our activity in Wales, who many of you, I'm sure, know. He's here today. We've also have a stand here. And our job is effectively to make sure that good technology innovation ideas make their way through to commercialization, and in doing so, reduce the cost of offshore renewables and also try and boost the UK economy. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, we typically focus around 80% of our effort on offshore wind, about 20% of our effort on marine energy. We have to split it that way. But what we haven't addressed until now really is the elephant in the room, which is the main challenge around marine energy is figuring out how to get more revenue support, how to create a more attractive end market so technology developers and project developers can try and stitch together their business plans. And so, around about 6 months ago, together with Renewable UK, we had a dialogue with the UK government to say, well, okay, how can we create an effective revenue support mechanism for wave and tidal? And the answer was, well, the industry has to pass 3 key tests. And those tests are, is there a clear pathway to cost reduction where ultimately this sector could be cost competitive with other forms of generation? The second question was, well, is there a sizable market to which we can export goods and services, realise the economic growth potential of the sector? And the third question was, well, will this actually save any carbon? Will this help us meet our legally binding carbon targets? And so the Catapult, together with key stakeholders from industry and also supported by Renewable UK, have set about trying to answer these questions. I'm going to very quickly run through these 3 questions now, and perhaps there'll be some discussion and Q&A afterwards. So the first question is all about cost reduction. And so we've set 2 clear milestones for the industry, one at 200 megawatts and one at 1 gigawatt, thinking they're reasonably sensible milestones to point to. And what our analysis suggests is that most of our cost reduction journey will be realised between now, around 10 megawatts installed, and around 200 megawatts installed. There is a huge amount of learning we will do as we shift from prototype devices to array devices, and that's quantified in the slide here. There's also a significant amount of learning that we'll do between 50 megawatts and 200 megawatts. So as we learn how to effectively deploy more and more devices, how we learn to effectively operate the devices. And as we do that, we also expect to see that the cost of borrowing money to build out our projects will also get cheaper. And we've seen that significantly in the offshore wind sector. We expect to see that happening in the wave and tidal sector too. So by the time we get to around 200 megawatts, we're looking at around £130 per megawatt hour. So we're going from where we are today, somewhere around £300 per megawatt hour. By the time we've got 200 megawatts in the water, we think we can more than half that levelized cost of energy. And many of those levers we need to pull to do that, the people in the room here, we know what they are. And then as we deploy further out to 1 gigawatt, we believe the cost of energy for tidal energy can get to below £100 per megawatt hour. And so that's a really important message in terms of that cost reduction pathway. We can see much of what we need to do, and we can be confident that we can get there as a sector. In terms of the second question, it's all about deployment. So is there a significant market? Well, we've looked at some of the data. We think the most reliable set of data is the IEA, the International Energy Agency data that produce technology perspective reports where they really look at the potential for different renewable technologies. They're forecasting around 350 gigawatts potential for wave and tidal energy. And in the UK, various studies have existed, but we can reliably suggest that there's between 5 and 20 gigawatts of tidal and wave energy in the UK. And so, yes, there's a sizable market there, but importantly, we need to also understand what's the potential to build on, what's the base in terms of technology developers, what's the base in terms of existing supply chains. So today, there's around 800 supply chain companies in the UK. We still have 20, more than 20 tidal developers, more than 20 wave developers. So we do have the potential, we do have a significant global resource. And so if you put those two things together, yes, the UK can potentially pass that. Could the UK exploit the market opportunity? We also then, a second really important point is that when you look at where the market opportunity can be exploited and where the growth potential is, it's in areas of the UK that other industries don't reach. So it's in coastal communities, and we've put some dots on the map there indicating where they are, and we think that's a really compelling argument for government. So what we then did was say, well, okay, so if we understand what the growth potential is and what the GVA, the economic potential for the UK is, and we understand the cost, well, can we put those two things together and try and think about, well, what sort of deal could this be for government? And so on these charts, we've got tidal on the left, wave on the right, and everything above the line is the economic potential that can be realised. So we've got, I can't quite read the chart, but I think we've got, let me get this right. So we've got UK projects in blue, we've got the rest of the world in orange, so that's what we can export. And then below the line, you've got the cost in subsidy that the government would have to pay to fill the gap between wholesale price, effectively, and what it would cost to build out the projects. So what you can see here is actually the investment the government needs to make in subsidy is a lot less than actually the economic potential that can be realised from this. And it's important to say that we're currently in a conversation with the government around methodologies used for these numbers. But we believe that this indication is actually quite positive. And then if you couple that with where that economic benefit would be felt around the UK, there's potentially a compelling case to be made. The other important point to make is this relies on global installed capacity. So the UK can't get down the cost curve on its own, and it can't actually realise these economic benefit numbers on their own either. So this requires our colleagues in France, in Canada, further afield, to all be developing and installing wave and tidal projects to which we can be exporting various products and services. We haven't got quite as much detail as we'd like around the wave energy numbers, and so we've effectively made a fairly crude assumption that that will happen 10 years behind tidal. We don't know if that's the case or not. I'm sure there are wave developers in the room who would disagree with that statement, but we found that that's quite a logical way of thinking about it. We've seen onshore wind become cost competitive. We're seeing offshore wind make tremendous progress about 10 years later. And so thinking about tidal and then wave at that genesis as well seems reasonably convenient. And then the final test is all about, well, will wave and tidal energy save us carbon? Well, intuitively, yes, of course it will. Now, typically, wave and tidal projects will generate electricity at a tenth the carbon of coal or diesel and about a third of the carbon of gas. And they're the two sort of energy sources that we've compared this to as well. Nuclear is kind of that elephant in the room there where it's very hard to figure out what the embedded carbon of nuclear projects is. But I think we recognise that we'll need both nuclear and tidal energy in the short to medium term. The other point to note, of course, is the predictability, particularly of tidal energy, which is really appealing for the future of the energy system. And that trace at the back there, at the bottom there, was pulled out from Atlantis a few weeks ago, showing the real predictability of their project up in the Pentland Firth. So that's a really quick snapshot of that analysis. A Catapult will be delighted to have further conversations around that analysis. As I say, we're currently talking to BEIS officials, because it's really important that they accept the numbers that we've come up with here. They understand the assumptions behind it. It's also really important that industry are bought into the assumptions behind it. And we hope that this will open the door to further dialogue, perhaps ultimately to better revenue support mechanisms for the wave and tidal community. So that's really what the next steps are. So we're in a dialogue with BEIS at the moment. What is exactly the best mechanism for that revenue support is probably a topic for further debate, and I think Christoph's going to put some ideas up on that. And then wave energy. I think for us at the Catapult, we remain open-minded around the wave energy journey. Clearly, we're not getting the design convergence and the learning that we're seeing for tidal at the moment, but it doesn't mean that there aren't cost-competitive concepts out there. I'll leave it there for now and hand back to Sue. Thanks.